How's it going, guys? It's part two of my investing series, Investing 101. This episode is about prerequisites. So, as always, you can find the link to the slide deck right here on the screen. I'll put it in the description of the video. So, in the prerequisites video, I'm going to talk about some of the things that you should do before you ever start thinking about investing. These are absolutely necessary. So, let's just get started and go through those. So before you invest, you need to make sure that you've taken care of bad debt. So bad debt is stuff like credit card debt, anything with a high interest rate, typically anything higher than 5-ish% would be considered bad debt. And then I think in most cases, it's important to do a little bit of budgeting, especially if you're in a situation where you're living paycheck to paycheck. Budgeting is a great way to see what your income is on a monthly basis and what your expenses are, specifically recurring expenses and also non-recurring or discretionary expenses. I wouldn't recommend doing this, forever, but a couple months just to kind of get a good idea of where you are, what your cash flow is, that is your income after you've subtracted all your expenses. And then finally, it's important that you have an emergency fund so that if something goes wrong, you don't lose all your money. If, let's say, the market crashes and we enter the second Great Depression, which, who knows if that's going to happen, but it might happen. If that happens, and let's say your portfolio is down 80%, then you're pretty much out of luck when it comes to covering any expenses if you lose your job. So before you start investing in putting some of your money in stocks or something like that, make sure you have a good safety net. And let's talk about what constitutes bad debt. So as I've mentioned already, credit card debt is probably the worst offender. Payday loans are probably even worse. They have incredibly predatory interest rates, and credit card debt and payday loans are both really bad ideas. Unfortunately, I think the latest statistic is 47% of Americans have credit card debt. It's not the end of the world if you're in that situation. I'm going to talk about some strategies to get out of credit card debt, and it's definitely scary and it seems impossible. But if you think about some basic principles, then you could come up with a plan to get out of credit card debt and finally be free from that. So if you have multiple credit cards with a balance that's being carried over month to month and you're accruing interest on those, then it's important to prioritize which ones you pay off first. So obviously you want to pay the minimum amount on each card. Otherwise it has a large impact on your credit score, and that's never good. But once you've paid the minimum payment on each of the cards, then you want to focus on paying off the card with the highest interest rate first. Alternatively, this might be a reasonable approach, but maybe somewhat inferior to the first approach. You could also go by which one has the smallest balance and eliminate that one first. I think that's the version that Dave Ramsey recommends because there's a psychological effect to having a lot of different credit cards with debt accruing on them. And so knocking out the easy ones first might be a good strategy just to psychologically prepare you for continuing your progress on this. And like I will talk about in some future slides, it's important to create a budget, and it's especially useful for getting out of credit card debt. If you look at your monthly income and your monthly expenses, then you might be able to cut some corners. Let's say you're subscribing to Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus, but you never watch Hulu. There's an opportunity to, unsubscribe from Hulu, and then that's an additional, $10 or whatever they cost per month to put towards paying off that credit card. Realistically, if you're in credit card debt and it's bad, then you probably shouldn't have any streaming service at all. So, ask a friend if you can borrow theirs or something like that, or just watch YouTube. There are definitely some corners you can cut. You can look at your restaurant spending and see if that's something that you could cut out a little bit. Instead of going 3 times a week to a restaurant, you could go 1 time a week to a restaurant. You don't have to completely cut it out of your life, because I know that quality of life is important, But there are some corners you can cut, and this might be a good strategy. And there's this little known fact about credit cards. The way that they calculate how much interest to add is based on your daily average balance throughout the month. I just wanted to go over a quick example from an article on NerdWallet, which is linked in the slide deck. So let's say you owe $4,000 on your card and you can afford to pay $500 a month. If you make a $500 payment on the 25th day of your 30-day cycle, you would have an average daily balance of $3,900. But if you made 2 payments of $250, let's say each time you get your paycheck on these specific days, then your daily balance would be $3,775. So basically, whenever your statement is generated and it determines how much interest you have to pay, you'll be paying interest on less, balance. And if you have a good credit score, NerdWallet says 690 or higher, you can transfer your existing balance from one credit card to another credit card that may have a 0% interest rate for some introductory period. So that might be an opportunity for you to transfer it with the intention of paying it off in full before it starts accruing even more interest, ideally. So I just want to say that credit card debt is a huge problem, and it's definitely not something that you should allow to happen if you have the chance. Once you've finished paying off that credit card debt, it's important to think about credit card use going forward. There are actually a lot of benefits to having a credit card. You can use it to build credit. There's a certain sense of security, like if there's a fraudulent charge, it's easier to get that cleared than if you made that charge on a debit card. There's also insurance when you travel. There's rental insurance. There's all kinds of stuff that is beneficial on a credit card. You can get cash back, you can get miles, you can get rewards, you can get sign-up bonuses when you open a credit card, but you need to really kind of change the way you think about credit card usage. If you have a history of abusing that in the past, you just want to make sure that you think of it just as sort of an intermediary between your bank and your purchase, just so that you can reap these benefits like cashback. And that should be the only purpose of buying something on a credit card. That 2% cashback is pretty great. And I love credit cards for that reason. You should never buy something that you are not able to immediately pay off immediately after the purchase. So credit card debt is the first thing that you want to make sure that you have none of before you even think about starting investing. And this one is, somewhat a little bit more optional, but it's also something that's good to think about. I did this myself before I started investing. Creating a budget is a little bit complicated, but there are some apps that simplify this. The first one that comes to my mind is Mint. There's also one called Every Dollar by Dave Ramsey. There's one called Personal Capital. That's more investing focused, but it also has some budget features. And then I included a list to more of these apps that you might enjoy using. So check out the slide deck for that. Personally, the apps that I've tried don't actually support all the banks that I use and some of the investing platforms that I use. And I've never actually found an easy app that lets me do everything automatically. And so my approach has been to put everything manually into a spreadsheet. Sometimes you can do that a little easier if you go to your bank portal and choose to export your transactions as CSV, and then you can import it into the spreadsheet. But I use a spreadsheet. So if you're doing a budget, there are a few considerations that you can take into account. And these are probably your most impactful choices that you can make. You would want to list out all your monthly expenses, or what you might call your bills. Obviously, the most expensive is probably rent or housing costs, and then some car costs might be the next expensive. Insurance is pretty expensive. Your internet bill is pretty expensive. But anyway, you want to think critically about your biggest expenses, rent, car payments, etc., and think about if you want to make any changes in the future. And then you can also think about how you pay for those expenses. So I actually had a column in my spreadsheet for what payment card I use to pay for these bills. And the debit cards obviously have zero cash back, and certain credit cards have different percentages of cash back for different categories. Like there's a credit card that I use for grocery shopping because I get 3% back. And there's a card that I use for streaming services because I get, a certain percent back. Whenever you do a budget, it's a good opportunity to figure out if you can, add a few more dollars to your income through cashback. It definitely adds up. It's not much, but it'll buy you a Starbucks coffee or something. There are a lot of budget plans that you could use. There's the 50-30-20 rule. There's the envelope system. There's a zero-based budget. These are all strategies you can use if you really get into budgeting. I did budgeting for a couple months and then I kind of got tired of it because it took several hours to manually input everything into the spreadsheet. So your mileage may vary, but I basically just use it to identify problem areas and then fix them. And then I was basically happy with my monthly income and monthly expenses, and I stopped doing a budget. That's the approach I suggest, but maybe you're a real stickler for the details, so you'll want to keep track of it each month. And if you do, more power to you. I just found that I have better uses of my time. Okay, so you've eliminated credit card debt, you've created a budget, and you've figured out what you're dealing with. Next, you want to make sure you have an emergency fund. Typically, people say an emergency fund should be about 3 to 6 months. 3 is a good minimum, because if you lose your job, then it'll take a couple jobs to find a replacement, especially right now with the pandemic and unemployment rates being really high. You know, if something really bad happens, you might have to move in with your parents, or get a roommate or something like that. So everyone's situation is different, but 3 is probably a good minimum. If you're really risk averse, you could go for a whole year, but a whole year of expenses just sitting in a checking account or a savings account, that seems pretty wasteful to me. So let's look at an example emergency fund. The average US monthly expenses are 5,102, which is higher than my expenses, so I actually feel pretty good about that. I don't know if this is per individual or per household, but that's definitely a bit more than I pay per month for everything. So this average person should generally have about 15,000 to 30,000 in their bank accounts. So I'd recommend a minimum of 10,000 probably if you're in the US. This is completely localized advice for the US. This would not make sense in other countries probably. So I have about 5 months of expenses saved up. And generally, if you're less risk averse, you're young, you're single, you don't have any obligations, you could take some risk and take a portion of your emergency fund and invest it based on your, depending on your brokerage account. Like Robinhood, they have a debit card that you can use to, liquidate funds and then spend if you need to in an emergency. M1 Finance has the same thing. I would probably not recommend this strategy just because whenever you liquidate your stocks, you have to pay taxes on that. So this is not really something that you should rely on for your emergency fund, but it's a possibility. Right now, my recommendation is probably not to do this because of how volatile the stock market and the economy is right now, even though we're in a massive bull run right now, which is a term I'll explain in the next video. Maybe in the what next video, I'll explore this in more detail. There are actually some advanced strategies you can use. I think there's some retirement accounts that you can use as an emergency fund. So there are definitely some strategies out there that are viable, but I wouldn't say that they're optimal. So in summary, you want to get rid of credit card debt, you want to set a budget, and you want to have some sort of emergency fund. These are the 3 things that I think are pretty much necessary before you start investing. In the next video, I'll go over some basic terms like bull market, bear market, margin, market cap, valuation, all those terms that most investors should know. So if you're excited for that video, smash the thumbs up button and smash the subscribe button, smash the notification bell, smash the comment, smash your mouse in the comment field and type out a comment, and then smash the send button. Smash all the buttons. And please join my Discord community if you're a gamer or if you use Discord in general to interact with people. It's going to be a very fun community. It's very small right now, but strength in numbers. Come join the community and help out. And that's my video. I will see you guys next time. I'm not going to do the thing this time. I'm just going to cut to outro.